Door clicked shut so softly it was almost polite. That was the part that stayed with me. Not a slam, not even a firm close, just a soft, careful click, like my daughter-in-law was trying not to wake a sleeping child. Then the sound of her heels on the hallway floor, quick and purposeful, fading away. Then nothing. I stood at the window of room 14 and watched their car pull out of the parking lot. My son didn't look back. He had one hand on the wheel and one elbow resting on the open window, relaxed, like a man who'd just finished a long errand. His wife was already on her phone. I was 73 years old. I had raised that boy alone after his father died. I had worked 31 years as a bookkeeper for the same small manufacturing company in Columbus, Ohio. I had balanced other people's accounts, made sure every number was right, every column added up, every discrepancy explained. I was not a woman who confused things. I was not a woman who forgot things. But standing there in that room with its single window and its adjustable bed and its curtain the color of old mustard, I felt something I hadn't felt since the week my husband died. I felt like I had disappeared. They had explained it to me over dinner 3 weeks earlier. My son, I'll call him my son because that is what he is, even now, sat across from me at my own kitchen table with his hands folded the way he always did when he was about to say something he'd already decided. His wife sat next to him. She had brought a folder. "Mom," he said, "we've been talking, and we think it might be time to get you some support." I remember looking at the folder. It had a logo on it. They had done research. I told him I didn't need support. I told him I had my routines, my garden in the back, my neighbor Cheryl, 2 doors down, who came by for coffee on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I told him I had just driven myself to my cardiologist appointment the week before, and Dr. Okonkwo had said my numbers looked stable. He nodded, through all of it the way you nod at someone who is saying something you've stopped listening to. It's not just about the appointments, Mom. It's about the day-to-day. What happens if you fall? What happens at night? His wife opened the folder. She slid a brochure across the table toward me. Sunrise Gardens, Assisted Living. There was a photograph of a white woman in her 70s smiling at a flower arrangement. "We've already toured it," she said. "We think you'll really love it." That phrase. "We think you'll really love it." Like they were telling me about a restaurant they'd picked for my birthday. I didn't say yes that night. I said I would think about it. But my son called every day for 2 weeks, sometimes twice. He talked about liability. He talked about their own schedule, how far they lived, how hard it was to worry. He said the word safety so many times it started to feel like a threat. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I got tired. I got tired in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not physically tired, but worn down from the inside, from defending my own adequacy to my own child. I signed the temporary admittance agreement on a Tuesday. I told myself it was temporary. The word was right there in the paperwork. The first week at Sunrise Gardens was disorienting in the way that all new places are, but also in a specific, particular way that I hadn't expected. It was the smallness. My bedroom was smaller than my laundry room at home. There was a shared bathroom down the hall. The dining room had round tables and soft music playing at every meal. Always something instrumental, always the same volume, like they were trying to keep everyone just calm enough. I was not unhappy with the staff. The nurses were kind. A young woman named Thea always remembered how I took my coffee. No sugar, just a little cream, and she'd have it ready for me in the morning without me asking. That mattered. But my son called less. In the first week, he called twice. In the second week, once. He came to visit on a Sunday afternoon at the end of my 3rd week and stayed for 45 minutes. His wife did not come. He sat in the chair next to my bed and looked at his phone twice while I was talking. I asked about my house. He said, "We're keeping an eye on it." I asked what that meant. He said, "Don't worry about it, Mom. That's what we're here for." I didn't push. I didn't know then what I should have been pushing about. What I did know was that I missed my house, not in a sentimental, abstract way. I missed specific things, The light in my kitchen at 7 in the morning, the way it came through the window above the sink and lit up the whole counter. My cat, Biscuit, who my neighbor Cheryl had taken in but who I worried about every day. My garden, which no one was watering. The particular silence of my own living room at night, which was nothing like the sounds that moved through the walls of Sunrise Gardens after 9 o'clock. I started writing things down. Not a journal exactly, more like notes to myself. Dates. Phone calls. Things my son said and didn't say. I don't know why I started. Maybe it was the bookkeeper in me. Maybe something new before I did. The moment I understood was a Wednesday morning in March, 6 weeks after I'd arrived. I was in the common room, which is where I usually sat in the mornings because the light was better, when another resident, a woman named Greta, who had been there 4 years and knew everything about the place, sat down across from me with her crossword puzzle and said, without looking up, "Did they sell your house yet, or are they still deciding?" I set down my coffee cup. "What did you say?" She looked up then, and I could see in her face that she'd assumed I knew. "Your son was here last week. I heard him talking to the director about your home sale. Something about the listing." I sat with that for a long time after she went back to her puzzle. Listing. My son had used the word listing at Sunrise Gardens with the director without telling me. I asked to use the phone at the front desk that morning. My cell phone had stopped working 2 weeks after I arrived. The battery had gone, and when I mentioned it to my son, he said he'd bring a charger and then didn't. I had assumed it was an oversight. I understood in that moment that it may not have been. I called my home number. A recording. The line had been forwarded. I called my son's cell phone. He picked up on the third ring and said, "Mom, I can't really talk right now. I'm in a meeting." I said, "Are you selling my house?" There was a pause. A specific kind of pause. The kind that contains a calculation. "We were going to talk to you about that," he said. "It makes sense financially. The upkeep is expensive, and with you there long term." "Long term," I said. "I signed a temporary agreement." Another pause. "Mom, that was just the initial paperwork. You thought I wasn't coming back." He didn't answer right away. And in that silence, I heard it clearly. Not malice, exactly, but assumption. They had assumed that once I was there, I would stay. That the path of least resistance for everyone, including me, was to simply remain, to let things be decided, to stop asking about the light in my kitchen. I hung up. I want to be honest about what the next few days felt like, because I think people sometimes imagine these moments as clean, as if understanding a thing gives you immediate clarity about what to do. It doesn't. I was angry, yes. I was hurt in a way that went all the way down, the kind of hurt that comes from realizing someone who loves you has also underestimated you completely. But I was also scared. I was 73 years old in an assisted living facility with a broken cell phone and a son who was already talking to a real estate agent. What I had was Cheryl. I asked Thea if I could borrow her phone during her break, and Thea, without asking a single question, God bless her, handed it over and stepped outside the room. Cheryl picked up on the second ring. I told her everything in about 4 minutes. She was quiet through all of it, which is one of the things I have always loved about her. She listens before she responds. Then she said, "What do you need?" I told her I needed 2 things. I needed her to go to my house and tell me if there was a listing sign in the yard, and I needed her to find me the number for an elder law attorney. She called me back 40 minutes later on the front desk phone. There was a sign in my yard. It said, "Coming soon," and she had a name and a number. Martin Alvarez, Elder Law and Estate Planning, 15 years in practice, office in Dublin, Ohio. I called him that afternoon. Mr. Alvarez asked me questions I hadn't thought to ask myself. Had I signed a power of attorney? I had. Years earlier, standard estate planning, my son listed as my agent in the event I became incapacitated. Was I incapacitated? No. Was I cognitively impaired in any documented way? No. Had I signed anything at Sunrise Gardens beyond the temporary admins agreement? I had signed some financial disclosure forms, but I had a copy of everything filed in the accordion folder I had packed in my suitcase the day I left home, because I was, at my core, a bookkeeper and I kept my documents. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Mrs. Myas, Caldwell, a power of attorney, is not a transfer of ownership. Your son cannot sell your home without your signature on a deed transfer. If a listing has gone up, it is likely being done in anticipation of obtaining your consent, or in the hope that you won't realize you need to withhold it." I asked him what I could do. He told me. The first thing I did was contact my bank. I called the branch manager directly. I had banked there for 22 years, and she knew my name, and I told her I needed to review all recent transactions on my accounts, and I needed to flag any changes to my account access that I had not personally authorized in writing while in my presence. There had been 1. My son had added himself as a joint account holder 6 weeks earlier using a form I had apparently signed along with the other Sunrise Gardens paperwork. I do not remember signing it. The form was dated the same day as my admittance agreement. The branch manager was very professional and very calm, and she walked me through the process of removing him from the account and placing a notation on the file. She didn't ask me why, she just did it. The second thing I did was call Mr. Alvarez back and ask him to send a formal letter to the real estate agency that had placed the listing on my property, notifying them that the property owner had not authorized any listing agreement and that any sale proceeding without the owner's notarized signature on a deed would constitute fraud. The listing came down within 36 hours. My son called me at the Sunrise Gardens front desk that evening. I was in my room eating the dinner. Thea had brought me because I had told her I wasn't feeling well, which was not entirely untrue. He was not yelling. That surprised me, actually. His voice was controlled, tight, the way it gets when he's trying to stay measured. He said they'd only been trying to help. He said the maintenance on the house was genuinely expensive. He said he'd thought I understood this was the direction things were going. I let him finish. Then I said, "I'm coming home." He said, "Mom, you can't just—" "I'm coming home," he said again. "I will be ready Friday morning. You can drive me, or I will ask Cheryl to come." There was a long silence. Then he said, "We need to talk about this properly." "We will," I said, "at my kitchen table, in my house." Cheryl came Friday morning at 9 o'clock. She brought Biscuit in his carrier. She had been keeping my garden going. She'd started watering it on her own when she noticed it looking dry, without me even asking, just because she knew. I signed myself out of Sunrise Gardens that morning. The paperwork was straightforward. I was not a ward of the state. I was not under a conservatorship. I had signed a temporary agreement and my temporary stay was over. Thea hugged me at the door and told me to take care of myself. Greta, in the common room, gave me a small nod over her crossword puzzle. I think she understood. The drive home took 22 minutes. When Cheryl turned onto my street and I saw my house, my porch, my front door with the wreath I'd hung in October still on it, my bird bath in the front yard, I didn't cry. I had expected to cry. Instead, I felt something more like a settling, like a room coming back into focus. Cheryl made the coffee while I opened every window in the house. My son came 2 days later. His wife did not come, and I don't know whether that was his choice or hers. He sat at my kitchen table in the same chair as before, but he didn't fold his hands this time. He looked tired. He looked, if I'm honest, a little younger than usual. Not younger in the way of youth, but younger in the way of someone who has had something stripped away that he thought he had. I had asked Mr. Alvarez what my options were. He had explained elder financial abuse laws, what constituted a violation, what would need to be proven. He had been clear that what had happened fell into a gray zone legally. No money had been moved without my permission. No sale had been completed. The power of attorney had been used to add himself to my account, which was legally questionable. But by the time we had corrected it, there was nothing to litigate. He had also told me quietly that what I chose to do from a family standpoint was entirely my decision. I had thought about it for 2 days. When my son sat down, I poured him coffee because I am still his mother. Then I sat across from him and I told him what I knew, point by point, the way I used to present account discrepancies to my employers. Calmly, clearly, without drama, just the numbers. He tried to explain a few things. I let him explain them. Some of what he said was probably true. He had been genuinely worried. The house maintenance was genuinely expensive. They had genuinely convinced themselves that they were acting in my interest. People are very good at that, convincing themselves. When he was finished, I said, I want you to understand something. I am your mother. I am not your dependent. I have not been your dependent. And I will make my own decisions about my own life for as long as I am capable of making them. And if that day comes when I am not, it will not be you who decides alone. I will have chosen, in writing, with a lawyer present, who that person is. Do you understand? He nodded. His eyes were wet, which I had not expected. I love you, I said, and I need you to respect me. He came back the following Sunday for dinner. He came alone. He brought a pie from the bakery near his office, cherry, which is my favorite, which he remembered. We didn't talk about any of it again. Some things don't need a second conversation, only a first, real one. That was 14 months ago. My house is not for sale. The listing sign is gone, and so is whatever version of myself stood at the window of room 14, watching a car pull out and wondering how things had come to that. I updated my estate planning documents with Mr. Alvarez. I have a new power of attorney that includes specific written limitations on what my agent can and cannot do, and it names 2 people, my son and Cheryl, who must agree jointly on any major decisions. I have a written directive about care preferences that I signed in his office with a notary. Everything is documented, numbered, filed. My son has copies. Cheryl has copies. Mr. Alvarez has copies. I also canceled the old joint bank account my son had been added to and opened a new one with only my name on it. I set up automatic transfers for my regular bills. I updated my emergency contact at Dr. Okonkwo's office to include Cheryl as an equal alongside my son. These are not dramatic gestures. They are paperwork. They are, in the end, the most powerful thing I know how to do. My garden came back this spring. The hydrangeas I planted along the back fence bloomed later than usual, but they came. Biscuit has reclaimed his spot on the windowsill and watches the birds with the same focused indifference he has always had. Cheryl comes Tuesday and Thursday, same as always. There are mornings I wake up in my own bed and just lie there for a moment, listening to the particular silence of my own house. The refrigerator hum. A car passing on the street. The bird starting up before the light comes. I am still 73 years old. I am still, by any reasonable measure, all right. And I am still the only one who gets to decide what happens in this house. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being in a room full of people who have already decided who you are. That was room 14. That was the dining room with the instrumental music always at the same volume. That was my son sitting across from me with his hands folded in a folder his wife had prepared, looking at me like I was a problem that had already been solved. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't started writing things down. If the bookkeeper and me hadn't kicked in, quietly, without drama, just noting dates and words and silences. Most people, when they're worn down, stop keeping track. That's what exhaustion is designed to do, to make you let go of the thread so that someone else can hold it. I almost did. 6 weeks in, with a dead phone and no garden and a cat I was worried about, I almost let the thread go. What stopped me was a woman named Greta asking a question she assumed I already knew the answer to. That's how small the hinge was. One sentence from someone who had no stake in my situation, no reason to say it except that she thought I knew. And because I didn't know, it cracked something open. I've thought about what it means that my son genuinely believed he was helping. I don't think he was a villain. I think he was someone who had looked at me and seen fragility where there was only age, and had started making decisions in the space between what I needed and what was convenient. That's a quiet kind of wrong, It doesn't announce itself. It comes dressed as concern and speaks in the language of safety. And if you're not careful, if you're tired enough, lonely enough, grateful enough just to be visited on a Sunday afternoon, you can mistake it for love. What I know now is that doing right by the people you love requires more than good intentions. It requires the discipline to ask what they actually want, not what you've decided is best. My son had the first thing and not the second. And I had spent 6 weeks absorbing the cost of that difference. What pulled me back wasn't anger, though the anger was there. It was the same thing that had gotten me through 31 years of other people's numbers. The understanding that clarity is a form of respect you give yourself first. I called Cheryl because I knew she would listen before she spoke. I called Mr. Alvarez because I understood that knowledge in a situation like mine was not optional. It was the only tool I had that no one could take away without my permission. Walking back into my own house was not triumphant. It was quiet. Cheryl made coffee. I opened the windows. Biscuit found his spot on the sill within 20 minutes, like he'd never left. What I want anyone watching this to understand is that getting older does not mean becoming smaller. The people who love you, really love you, will ask before they decide. They will sit across from you and wait for your answer. And if someone in your life has stopped asking, that is information. Not a verdict on them, not a crisis, but information. Use it. I used mine.